Hello, wonderful people of the internet. My name is Matthew. Thank you for coming and watching this video on Matthew Talks About American Literature and More. Today, I'm first of all here to wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and to rejoice that this year has been great, not only for myself, but also for my reading habits. I'm going to be giving you my top 10 books that I've read in 2025. I will also be giving you some honorable mentions. Now, a couple things to say right off the bat. One, there are some books that I have started that I know I love, but I haven't finished them, and I likely won't finish them until the year is over. And that those books will be included on my 2026 video. Also, I would like to say that I will be talking about 15 books here. And these books, to me, are all the books that I think have given me a reading experience that I would say is unique, special, and that I will cherish for my life. There are plenty of other books in my library to my left that I think are great and that I loved reading them. And I think they all have moments that I think are worthy of the reading experience and that I would recommend to other people. In fact, I will be creating a whole long list of all the books I've read this year, all the books I haven't finished, and a bunch of short stories that I have read, or at least read most of from their collections this year. But these books I consider special in that, while every single one of them, I don't believe any book is perfect, but there are some books that are as close to perfect as they can get. And these books, I would qualify as that. They each are constructed in a way that even if there may be a version that could be constructed that instead of 98 out of 100 people would enjoy, 99 out of 100 would enjoy. It may exist somewhere out there in the ether. I can say these books, there's nothing wrong with them for me that I would change, I would need another version of, and that the experience works for me top down, left to right. There may be some issues here and there, but none of them detract from the fact that I would want these books near me for possibly the rest of my life. I would also like to point out that while I have ordered these books in total 1 through 15, all these books mean something important to me in a different way. So like, I could be sitting on my chest one day thinking about book 15 and thinking, that one gave me a better experience than the book number 1 on this list. And while I am fairly confident in that the order is fairly stagnant, like I probably wouldn't look at this video in a few years and say, oh, that was a bad order. I could easily see myself one day saying, that book at spot 10 means more to me than spot 5. So like all these books, while there is an order, I could easily interchange all of them for the most part, depending on what time of day or what stage of life that I'm in. So let's start getting to the list. I got myself a nice drink, but you don't have to go as overboard as me. People who know me know that I carry that mug everywhere. So, let's start getting into the books and why they mean so much to me. And hopefully, if there are books in here that you haven't read, this video will encourage you to pick them up. So, let's dive in. Okay, so at number 15, we have an author that I discovered this year and has quickly become one of, if not my favorite author of all time. At number 15 is The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. Now, this book is a special book to me, that it's a humanistic novel about a family that escapes Oklahoma, heads to California during the Great Depression and the Dust Bowl, and encounters adversity through banking and oppressive farming practices along the way. This is not a traditional dramatic novel, which is one of the reasons why I would say it's at number 15. It doesn't have big, well, it does have some action set pieces, but doesn't have major dramatic moments. It's not where you have that one Perry Mason or soap opera moment where you say, oh man, that's incredible. It does have moments of great drama, and the characters in here are so well realized. I think of my family when I read this book. But I can't see why, for some people, this book would not work for them. It's a compassionate social novel. But once I got into the story, I felt invested the entire way. And it's one of those books that, even though I don't think that this is like a crowd-pleasing book, if you will. Like, I think most people who will pick this up will like it. But there are so many moments in here that linger, that when you become an adult especially, that there are so many moments that relate to everyday life. There's poeticism in the descriptions, into the struggles when it comes to work, when it comes to finding a job, when it comes to dealing with your family, that have endured. And this is a book that I will absolutely pick up during stages of my life. Like if I ever get laid off, if I ever have a family death, whenever I have a family of my own. And this book it's almost like a guide to a human and struggling life, a human life that's struggling. And that's why I will wholeheartedly recommend this book, and why I will hold it close to my heart for years to come. And it is my 15th favorite book of the year. Now, this is a book that in many ways is harder to recommend. This is my number 14, and it is Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. Now, this is a book that is pretty famous for the relationship between a young man and a young girl that is, I don't want this video to get demonetized, but very bad in nature. But I will say that this book, even though it's essentially a reverse Taxi Driver, is written in a way where it's not a smut-ridden book. It's more, there's no crazy sex scenes between the main character, Humbert, and the young girl, or even women his own age. It's not a super graphic book. What I do think this book is a brilliant psychological exploration of a villain protagonist, an anti-hero. And while I don't think that Vladimir Nabokov condones anything that happens in this book, I think he does an expert treatment of something that I think is very hard to do in literature, where you have, or even in fiction in general, where you have, when your main character is the villain, or at least is such a bad anti-hero, that even though you know he's doing the wrong thing, you're so compelled by his story that you almost want him to keep doing what he's doing. Like, you don't want him to succeed, but you want to keep watching him throughout the journey. Two examples that I like to give, that I want to compare Humbert in this book to, are Breaking Bad and its main character, Walter White, and Hannibal Lecter from The Silence of the Lambs. Now, both of these characters are, in the end of the day, terrible people. But they're written in such a compelling way that even if, like, intellectually you know they're doing the wrong thing, they're so compelling to watch that you just, in many ways, you want them to succeed so you can just watch that train ride going. Now, I 100% understand why people refuse to read this book because of its subject matter. Like, yes, like those two examples I mentioned, they are, I think most people, other than people that are squeamish about violence and very depraved content, will watch them. Like Breaking Bad, Beloved, Silence of the Lambs is intense, but I think most people will watch it and like it. Given the subject matter of this book, I understand why most people, or at least a good amount of people, will not read this book, and I respect that. Given that the nature of the crimes of this book is in many ways the most tabooed crime of all. Like, of course, intellectually, there are probably worse crimes. Like, I would consider murder a worse crime. But I think there's a social stigma that I do agree with that views the crimes and the negative things that Humbert does in this book as almost like the lowest rung of what a person can do. So if that is an issue for you, I get it. But this book is incredibly well written. Vladimir Nabokov probably deserves the title of Mr. Prose Stylist in the English language more than anyone else. And the fact that Nabokov's first language wasn't even English and his second language wasn't even English it blows my mind. This book is so well written. The language is beautiful, and for the most part, it flows like a clear stream of water. It's an incredible book, and I do consider it part of the Great American Novel. I will mention that a bunch of these books I will be doing individual reviews for during my Great American Novel series. Grapes of Wrath, absolutely. Lolita, absolutely. And I will talk about them with more depth. And as I get better, hopefully the format will get better. And I'll prove and you'll enjoy those videos more. So, Lolita, phenomenal book. Now, for novel 13, we have a small novel. And this one's kind of special to me because I distinctly remember trying to read this novel about 10 years ago. And what's funny is that I tried to read this novel in Italy while I was meeting family members when I was 10. And I couldn't get past the first chapter. But now as an adult, and just before I was about to leave for Italy, I tried reading this novel and absolutely loved it. And it's another novel that is in contention for the Great American Novel. It is The Great Gatsby. Now, this is probably one of the most talked about books ever. It's in the conversation with books like Frankenstein, George Orwell's Animal Farm. They're basically the ones you read in school books or A Christmas Carol, something like that, that everyone's heard about, everyone's read, and everyone loves so much that it's almost uncool to say that you love this book. Well, this is a special book for me because, as I said, 10 years ago it didn't work. 10 years later, it worked great. I love this book. Now, the reason I do think it's at 13, it's because it is a short book. It's not an epic, sprawling book that, like Moby Dick or War and Peace, where people say, like, oh, you can analyze the heck out of this book and get something out of it every time. No. This is a simple story with very clean writing. Fitzgerald is a very clean writer that details it's almost a critique of the American dream, told by our narrator Nick Carraway, who observes Jay Gatsby and a struggle to get Daisy Buchanan back by any means by becoming whatever man he needs her to be. This book is such an introspective view on that idea, and I think it does it to perfection. It's not, like I said before, it's a book that is very limited. It has one idea, but it explores that idea so well that I think you could classify this as a perfect book about something. I like to say there are books about something, and there's books about everything. Now, I'm not saying that in a literal sense, like, oh, like this book can cover all of life. No, but there are books that like deal with so many things that you can look at them so many ways that you can say, like, hey, like, you can read this book and get this out of it, or you can read this book and get that out of it. This you can only really read and get one or two things out of it, which is a critique on the American dream and ambition. But it explores it so well that I think it deserves to be in the pantheon of greatest novels of all time, the greatest novels of this length, and as it marks a kind of turning point for me as a reader, I decided I'll put it at number 13. So, Great Gatsby, a great book. I also will be covering it on my Great American Novel series, but, this is one of those books that, everyone's talked about so much that I don't know what I can do to bring something new to it. But, great book. If you haven't read it, I'd be shocked if you haven't, or at least haven't heard the story. You absolutely should. Number 13, The Great Gatsby. Number 12 is a book that I have made a video on, and while I hope in the future that I will be able to remake some of the earlier videos as I get better at this. I think that this book gave me an experience that is unique enough that as a kind of watershed moment in my reading experience, I think it deserves to be on this list. And it does have a great iconic story, and that's The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne. Now, I have come to the conclusion that even though this is a fairly short book, the first, I don't know, 1 second. The first fifth of this book, called the Custom House section, you can pretty much just delete. It's not an important section of this book. You can skip it and you'll miss hardly anything. It's a prologue to the story. It's not needed. But everything about this story is foundational in world literature. It's about a woman, Hester Prynne, who gave birth to an illegitimate child and forced to display an A on her chest in the huge killjoy community that was the Puritans of the 1600s. And then her ex-husband returns and to discover who the father of the child is and her struggles and tribulations throughout that. And it's just a phenomenal story. It's a landmark of romanticism in the literary period. The melodrama here, unlike in some stories, worked for me. And while the writing is hard to get into, Nathaniel Hawthorne, I have read some of his short stories, and he's a master. His sense of control here is good enough that even though this book has like 5 clauses per sentence, it does breeze by. If that style doesn't work for you, I 100% get it. I wouldn't begrudge anyone who said they couldn't get into this book. But if you can get into the writing and the melodrama worked for you, the story is great, characters are great, well worth the read. So, number 12, Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne. Now, number 11. This is probably the only work from the 20th century that is on this list. And I will say, I'm not against contemporary literature at all. I'm just a guy that needs to curate his books carefully, because if I get like 4 or 5 books that I just don't like in a row, that could hurt my reading habits. And I always say, the classics of tomorrow are being written and published today. And this is a book that is one of the most beautifully written stories, I think, of the last 25 years. And I was somewhat hesitant to check it out because I thought, it may be a period piece. It may be something that it was just written at the time because it was a hot button at the time, but I was wrong. This book is incredible. That's The Kite Runner by Khaled Hosseini. This is probably one of the most emotional journeys of all time. It details the life of Amir coming of age as a child and how he failed his friend Hassan and his struggles as he's becoming an adult and how he deals with life with his family, his father, living a life in America, and his eventual return to Afghanistan. And it's just a beautiful story of friendship, redemption, family. And what's remarkable about this book is that, like, even though this was published in, I think, when was this published? 2003. It was after 9/11. I do know that. That on paper you would think, oh, this is just something written at the time because of the Afghanistan invasion, but it's an incredibly written book. And what I love about this book is that not only is it incredibly emotional, like Khaled Hosseini is what I like to call a master of emotional character minimalism. He's like Hemingway, but you get all the emotion from it. He doesn't strip away emotional language. He has very simple sentences, but there's also a lot of depth between those sentences. It's a great work of literary fiction. And also, he doesn't fall into the trap of what I think a lot of modern authors do, or at least a lot of modern popular authors, is that they almost write their books like movies. In the sense that on paper, a lot of this stuff works, but you can almost tell it's kind of shallow. It's very visual. It's very showing, not a lot of telling. And I get that's an issue in writing, show don't tell. But you can tell that there's a lot of depth and a lot of intricacy within these characters as they're written, rather than just them being shown, where it's very surface level in some other books. Not trying to knock contemporary authors. If you like those books, and I think there's some good books, but I think this is written like an exemplary contemporary novel about building to a man, coming of age story of Amir in Afghanistan. And I will say, like, just to clarify, like, you don't need to know a lot about the invasion of Afghanistan. Like, it's not written in that style. Like, it may help, but like, I don't know a lot about the invasion. Like, I haven't covered it. I haven't looked into it in a long time. And it works as a novel in and of itself. If you're from Afghanistan, you know the history. Like, it might help, but it was no issue for me. So, and be warned, this is a very emotional journey. I cried many times during this book. So, be warned. And there are some hard content, some intense content in here. So, a little bit of warning for that. I don't want to tell you what it is because it'll give away some spoilers. But if you're ready for this journey and you're ready to have your emotions tugged, pick up this one. Now, we're on our top 10. So, even though these aren't in the top 10, just know that the previous 5 honorable mentions, they could have easily been on here. They are all books that I hold near and dear to my heart, but some 10 had to make the 10, so let's get started. Number 10 is The Three Musketeers by Alexandre Dumas. Now, for those of you who don't know, about 2-3 years ago, I decided to read The Count of Monte Cristo, a YouTube channel that I respect, Extra History, did an extra literature, and I was just scrolling through a bunch of like tier lists on YouTube. I was told, hey, The Count of Monte Cristo is a huge book and it's the most entertaining classic you'll ever read. And I thought, you know what, I haven't read a fiction book in a while, I'll get into it. And it was incredible. I love The Count of Monte Cristo. I still think it's one of my favorite books. Again, not perfect, but it's a book that got me into reading and will always be near and dear to my heart. So I figured, why not bring a second book from that author? And so I decided to pick up Three Musketeers, another huge book. And again, it did not disappoint. Again, it's not perfect, but the story of D'Artagnan, which is really the fourth Musketeers, it always strikes me as a weird thing in literature. Why do they keep mentioning 3 Musketeers, 3 brothers, or a group of 3 when there's really 4? And they're romping adventures across France. Dumas is just a great, entertaining writer. He's like the OG writer of highbrow popular fiction, where, like, yes, it's not super literary, but the characters have plenty of depth. There's tons of action. The plot is fun to explore, and the character journeys, you feel for them with as much power and depth as you feel in any highbrow novel. The story is very engaging. It details D'Artagnan as he wants to be a musketeer, his encounters with the other 3, and his struggles against Cardinal Richelieu of France, and the alluring Femme Fatale, who appears as the villain throughout the book. Now, I will say, even though this book is incredibly long, it's like 600, pushes 700 pages, you'll just fly by through this book. There is one section, like, I don't want to deter you from reading it because I think it's a great book, that is around 60 pages right here, that does drag a lot. Like, I wanted to skim those pages, but I didn't. This book will fly by. Also, this book is also kind of special to me because I think the Mickey Mouse Three Musketeers adaptation was the first book adaptation that I ever saw as a child. So I wasn't a big reader at that time, but, you know, it's always special to me, like, saying, like, hey, like, one of those earliest childhood memories, and you finally read from a book, of watching a book adaptation, and you finally actually read the book that it's inspired by. I don't know. It brings some of that childhood nostalgia. So, Three Musketeers, great book. The next one, number 9, is a book a lot of you guys have probably heard of, and It's just recently adapted into a bunch of movies. I haven't seen them, but I hear they're amazing, and I plan to see them when the third one comes out. And that is Dune by Frank Herbert. I haven't read a bunch of science fiction as a child, and I thought, you know what, science fiction is one of those genres that I think, as someone with an engineering degree, I would be really into. So I just thought, like, well, hey, what's the best science fiction book? And everyone online said Dune, and it did not disappoint. This is one of the best plotted, most immersive sci-fi stories ever. One thing that I really appreciate in this book is that it comes with an appendix of a bunch of terms that help you get familiar with the world and the language used in the world. And the plot in this book is incredible. The characters, really well developed. The themes, great. And this book is also one of those books pretty easy to read. You know, like, it's very light, very breezy. Also, it's very thrilling, has a ton of action. And even though I will say, like, one of the critiques is that the characters are kind of two-dimensional. I'll say that they are, I won't say they're two-dimensional, but they're almost like archetypal in their symbolism. But really well developed, and the plot within these characters is so enthralling, so thrilling. The struggle between with the Atreides family and the House Harkonnen on Arrakis, so great. And while I did read the sequels, and the sequels weren't as good, and they didn't go in a way that I wanted this story to go. We can get into a whole discussion of that we won't do here. It's not relevant to this video. But I like this book enough, and I think it is self-contained enough that I can read this book again and say, like, hey, even though it does leave off on a kind of I wouldn't say a cliffhanger, but like a new frontier ending where, like, the sky's the limit, we're on the horizon. I can look at this book as a standalone and say, you know what, I can come up with my own ways of how they came up with their happily ever after. I'm not saying the sequels are terrible, but everything being equal, I prefer this book as a standalone, and as a standalone journey of Paul Atreides and his family throughout the planet of Arrakis, world building second to none. Dune is what you want out of a sci-fi journey. It's, as Frank Herbert said, it's science fiction for people who don't read science fiction. And as someone who hasn't read a lot of science fiction, it worked for me, and it's now number 9 on the list. So, good for you, Frank Herbert. I will also be looking into getting into more science fiction this year. I've got Flowers for Algernon, but that's not really relevant for now. But right now, Dune deserves a spot at number 9. Great book. Now, this one is frustrating, to say the least. As part of, when people know that I'm doing the Great American Novel series. Now, before I did that, like, before I even published my first video, before I even published the trailer, I decided, you know, like, a lot of these books are long, and it'd probably be a chore to have to read one every single week. So as almost like as a preparatory, I spent like a good part of a year before that saying, like, you know what, like, I think I should read most of these books, or at least a good number of them, just to have them in my back catalog before I publish these videos. Or, like, what's a major author? If this book is underrated, I should read it. Like, maybe, like, this author has this one famous book, but he might have another one that's even better. I should read that one. So before that, I think I read like 20 or 30 books. And there was this one author, Jack London, major American author. A lot of people have heard of him. I heard about him in school. He's basically the writer of Call of the Wild, White Fang, survival dog stories. I think they're foundational in the genre. I tried to read Call of the Wild. I couldn't get into it. I get some people love it, and I understand why. I'm not that into abstract survival stories, and I couldn't get into a dog POV. So I looked on Goodreads and thought, you know what, like, wow, Jack London has this other book. It has a 4.48 on Goodreads. I thought this was incredible, and I read it, and it does make my list. It's Jack London's Martin Eden. Now, what's so frustrating is that I hated this book's ending. I absolutely hate it. I understand why some people think it works thematically. And maybe if I reread it, it will improve. But man, this ending is awful. And I will be covering this book on the Great American Novel Series. And I will go into spoilers on why I don't like this ending. And I will say that, like, this is the one work of American naturalism and of literary naturalism, which is like a literary movement that views like outside forces as the driving force of storytelling, that I think works. Well, or at least works really well. Naturalism in general, if you differentiate it from realism, I think doesn't really work a lot of the times for me, because sometimes you get this huge void with the characters. Martin Eden is different. Martin Eden, the title character, is essentially a surrogate of Jack London himself. And basically he goes on this autodidactic journey of self-transformation as, you know, a rough, manly sailor that's kind of unsophisticated to become refined and become a successful writer for a woman he loves. And I'm not going to even tell you the name of the one, because the style and the energy in this book is so fantastic. For example, like, you know, a stereotypical story of a man falling head over heels with the imagined view of a woman rather than a real woman. For example, like for the first 4 chapters, they don't give you the woman's name. They just call her she. But there's so much energy and so much passion in Martin Eden's journey that wasn't a problem for me. Like, everything that happens in this book, even though, like, you can almost tell that the philosophy is kind of surface level, it's kind of the philosophy that you'd come up with. Because you sympathize with Martin Eden so much, it makes the story unbelievably engaging. I consider this Jack London's magnum opus, and if the ending was different, there's a solid chance it could be much higher on this list. It could even make number 1. I wouldn't say number 1. Well, you know. You know what I mean. Like, it could be much more beloved in my personal canon than it is. But that ending, I will say it was enough that I would consider never reading it again. But the journey has so much passion, so much energy, that I just had to get it up and pick it up on the bookstore again. Like, it was so bad that I just immediately went to return it at the bookstore and then immediately went and got it back. But like, it just opened up a random page and you see, like, Jack London poured his heart and soul into this one. Like, man, like, I know it sounds strange that, like, hey, it's on number 9 and, like, you're ranting about the number 8 and you're ranting about the ending, but it really is like that. Like, there's so much gold in here that ended in so much dirt, well, or dung, if that makes sense. But there's enough gold in here that I say, like, hey, this is an incredible book. All right, we're at number 7. This one I just published a video about, and I firmly believe it. Sometimes a Great Notion by Ken Kesey. It's one of the greatest American novels of all time. Imagine in your mind's eye Grapes of Wrath, a trolling Grapes of Wrath written in a light Faulknerian style. It details the story of Henry Stamper, and his brother Leland Stamper. Henry is the patriarch, the father of the 2 brothers. Hank Stamper is this rough, manly man in the logging communities of Oregon. He's going against a miners' strike, ruining the lives of the town. His brother, who's this bookish one, who feels that he needs to take his brother down because something his brother did when he was a child, comes back on a mission of vengeance. And the story reads like a Greek tragedy, with Leland having this internal struggle. He almost knows that he's a villain, but he doesn't want to be. Hank is aloof. He's a good person at heart, but he doesn't know how to meet the emotional needs of other people. Henry, his father, just being this overbearing man, like, he's so stubborn, he never gives an inch. He literally paints that on a plaque his father gave him after he left their family in Oregon. And the whole book is about this every character trying to troll each other, trying to screw over each other. It literally starts with Hank putting up someone who I'm not going to name, their disembodied arm on a flagpole with their fingers tied to form the middle finger. It reads like that throughout the whole thing. Plus, the style, its use of syntax, phenomenal. So, I can't recommend this book enough. There were times where I literally had to fist bump in the air because I loved what was going on. When I finished it, I literally went to go and give my mom multiple high fives because I just loved everything that happened in it. So, great book. It is a harder one to recommend because the style is more difficult. If you're new to reading, probably don't pick this one up. Like, I think if you can get through it, I think you'll love it. But like, I'd say get used to reading, then put this one higher on your list because it's just so great. One moment. Sorry. When I learn editing, I'll edit that out. Now, we are at number 6. Number 6 is In Cold Blood by Truman Capote. This is my first true crime fiction, my first nonfiction novel that I've ever read, and it did not disappoint. This is basically a book about the real-life story of the Clutters murders, a family of 4 members of a family that were murdered brutally by 2 people. And what's phenomenal about this book is that even though it's nonfiction, and I'm sure there may have been like some creative liberties in what was written, but from what I've read about this book, Capote did so much research that basically everything in this book is attested for. If I read some academic articles, I can say, oh, this didn't happen, this may not have happened, but like, this book is so well written that it makes you care about both the victims and the perpetrators. They're like, at the start, it makes you care about this family in Kansas called the Clutters, a husband and wife. There are 2 children that still live with them, and their tragic demise. But what's even remarkable about this book is that it makes you care about the 2 murderers. Like, you get to see their story. They write about them sympathetically, and even though you understand that they're horrible people, by the time that their fates come out, you do feel bad for them. And like, it gives humanity to everyone and shows that, like, hey, even though fiction is important for developing abstract empathy, real life stories like that, like, I like how when children say, hey, you shouldn't take what you see on TV as face value, and that's true. But you should also understand that, like, even the worst things in this world have humanity to them. And this book is so well written as nonfiction that I think the last part, which is like 90 pages, I read that at one sitting. It's just a phenomenal book. So, if you're into true crime fiction, this one's the one to read. It's just great. It's also a book that I think people can use to learn from. Like, if you need to report facts, if you're writing essays, if you're writing papers, if you need to into journalism, read Truman Capote. Like, and also I think, like, while I have read some of Truman Capote's other work, I think since he was this very aristocratic man, his prose was kind of glittery, if that makes sense. A lot of like descriptive, highbrow, like adjectives that are kind of describe things that are in vogue, if that makes sense. But given the subject matter, all that is stripped away, and the prose here is just so readable, so great, incredible. And you can feel that almost all of these people that Truman Capote interviewed and talked about, he cared about, and like he, in many ways, remembered and cared about their story. This is a phenomenal account. If you're interested in post-war America, this is the one to read. So, great stuff, great stuff. Now, at number 5, this is a book that just recently got rediscovered, and by another YouTube channel, Life on Books, and it did not disappoint. This is Hard Rain Falling. Hard Rain Falling details the life of Jack Levitt from his birth to around he's 33. And it's basically a tough-as-nails crime novel. You detail this life of this punk kid who grows up, matures, and tries to live a life that he wants and he can be proud of. and just everything and everyone in his life gets in the way. Like this kid, like this man, Jack, on paper, he's a bad kid, and in many ways, he is. But it makes you care about how, even though his instincts, like everyone, are dumb, they're superficial, they're in many ways wrong-headed and self-destructive, that the world is so tough that it makes you care about Jack, it makes Jack develop, and it makes you care about Jack when everything goes wrong in his life, but he nevertheless keeps going. I have said that my one critique, and it's a very small critique, so so don't take this as saying, oh, don't read it. But I have mentioned this, that like at the end of this book, well, I did cry at many parts of this book, but I was sobbing my eyes out at the end. So like, even though this is not a spoiler, I will say that like, there's an epilogue in this book that I think doesn't do enough for Jack. The story ends in many ways in a downer, but Jack goes through so much that I kind of wanted him, like, if you don't want to know anything else, just skip. Like, I'm not going to give details, but basically Jack loses something so bad at the end of this book. And the epilogue doesn't focus on Jack, it focuses on this other character. That's a pretty minor character. And while it does imply things, like it does hint to things that could give Jack a final victory, something to give him like a last hurrah, I felt like I could have used more of Jack at the end. And that even though my interpretation of the book gives him a more final victory, I really hope, I kind of wish the book made that more concrete, because Jack goes through so much. Like, this is one of those cases where like the character just goes through so much that you feel for the character so much that you just can't help but see yourself within the character, no matter how good, how bad, how different he is. This is one of those books, Hard Rain Falling by Don Carpenter. If you haven't read it, read it. It's great. Now, we got another big one, a tome. And that is Margaret Mitchell's Gone with the Wind, which is, I can say pretty confidently, is the greatest romance novel I have ever read and will ever read. Now, I know that's a pretty high bar. I still need to read Jane Austen. I need to read Little Women. I need to read Daphne du Maurier. I need to read a bunch of others. But the relationship between Scarlett O'Hara, one of the greatest characters in American literature, she's tough. She's almost like a proto-feminist. Like, she goes against dogma, but she's also a horrible human being. She's selfish. She's conceited. She's vain. But you root for her almost the entire length of the book. And the relationship between Ashley Wilkes, an honorable milquetoast of a man, the roguish Red Butler, the relationship is almost legendary, that they butt heads in a way that is so incredible to watch that it makes me regret that Margaret Mitchell didn't write a sequel to this, because this is one of those books that, like, if I could wave my magic wand and say, like, hey, give me a sequel, this one of the book would be it. Plus, the movie adaptation is incredible. It's long, but it's worth every minute. And same with this. Every page is worth it. It's a sweeping historical saga about the American Civil War and Reconstruction. Now, be warned that this book does have racial problems. It does distort American history in a way that is problematic. It reinforces the lost cause of the Confederacy and the Dunning School of Reconstruction, which are both outdated, racist, and misinterpretation of what America was, what happened during those times, and what were the real mistakes and what were the real successes of that time. So if you have a problem with that, don't read this book. For me personally, for example, like, all the characters talk with black accents and this weird odd dialect. It's hard to read. They do gloss over the issue of slavery and the Civil War. To some extent, I was able to like compartmentalize that. Like, I usually don't read books for political messaging. I don't deal with politics in my books. For the first, I'd say 600 pages, I'd say if I was writing this, I would change some things, but I can suspend my disbelief in a kind of Arthurian white knights type of thing, or like a samurai movie where like, yes, like I know that this is that Robin Hood or some anime characters, like I'm not that into anime, but like that this never happened in real life, but I can suspend my disbelief for fiction. Around page 600, there are problems. Like I like they start writing passages that make me wince. But I would say, like, especially if you're not an American, I'd wholeheartely recommend this book. It's a great read. It's super entertaining. Tons of action, tons of melodrama. Plus, you'd be missing out on one of the greatest characters in American literature, Scarlett O'Hara, and the relationship between her, Ashley Wilkes, Rhett Butler, and even Melanie Wilkes, which is another great character that you would think, like, she's too much of a saint. I wouldn't remember her, but no, she's a great character. So I would still wholeheartedly recommend this book, along with, just so you don't get the wrong impression, I'd recommend you read the Wikipedia article on the origins of the American Civil War, the Lost Cause mythology, the Dunning School of Reconstruction, and maybe the Wikipedia page on this book itself after you read it, just so you don't get any spoilers. Because while I do love this story and I do want everyone to experience it, I don't want the story to give people the wrong impression of what really happened in the United States during the time that this book is set. So, and since it's already a long book, that shouldn't be too tough a read to read like 5 Wikipedia articles, and maybe dig into like a lecture series or 2 or a good video on YouTube on what really happened. But read the story, read this book, enjoy the story. Just don't take the history from the story, if that makes sense. But overall, love this book. Great stuff. Highly recommend. Now, we're in the top 3. Now, this top 3 is like a social media darling. It even made put this publisher on the map, and I think it's every good as social media says, and it's Stoner by John Williams. Oh my God, this book, it ripped my heart out of my chest while it was still beating. It was so powerful. And what's remarkable about it is that it basically details the life of William Stoner, who's this fairly unremarkable man. It basically details his life of quiet desperation. And even though not much happens in this book, like he gets married, he has an affair, he has a kid, he works at a university, he loves literature. He has a couple friends, a few people who don't like him, but the emotions are so big in this book that it's almost like when you in your life, unless you're going through some really hard times, you don't usually you're not usually on these highs and lows and like you're crying, you're cheering or anything like that. No, like most of the life you're content, you're happy. And like during those big moments, like say you get married, someone dies, you go through a tough event like a divorce, or like you get laid off or something like that, or a new child is born or something like that. Then you feel these big emotions. And what this book is great at is that basically it almost condenses them all out into like a short 280-page book. Every major thing that happens to this stoner, you feel for it. I've been crying. I've cried in this book because I felt so much for this man and his life that I feel emotional just talking about it. That it's basically this a whole life in just 180 pages, and it details the most powerful moments in that unremarkable life, and almost makes it so that even though the life is unremarkable, it was still worth living. It's just such a beautiful book. It won't be for everyone. Stoner is a very passive character, but I like to say, like, I consider William Stoner, one of the greatest American protagonists, greatest American heroes in all of literature. He's the ultimate everyman. And I think this book is phenomenal. And while it won't be for everyone, I'd recommend it to everyone. So, Stoner, great book. And next, we have another book that's also beloved. I do consider it one of the great American novels. And it's the first book I read from this author. It's my favorite book I've read from this author. And I think it's one of the greatest books ever. I also think it's a Reddit darling. So, like, don't say that Matthew doesn't try to follow the waves of the world, of the reading world. And that is John Steinbeck's East of Eden. This book, I can say pretty confident, it's one of the most readable books I've ever read. It's a family saga, which in and of itself, I tend to love family sagas. It's a retelling of the Cain and Abel story. It basically details between the struggle with free will and the choice to be good and evil. It has some of the best character work I've ever read. It takes place partially in New England, United States, in the Massachusetts area. Well, I don't remember. Wait, was it Massachusetts? Or like the New England area, around the time of the Civil War to World War I. But then it moves to the Salinas Valley in California, and the details of the Salinas Valley. They're some of the most beautiful descriptions that I've ever read in any book ever. Phenomenal nature description. John Steinbeck is a masterful writer. He can make the everyday poetic. And the relationship between the Hamilton family, which is a surrogate for his own family, and the characters in them, I felt for every single one. One of my critiques that I do see about this book is, hey, like, the narrative, it's not, like, the narrative is kind of weird. Like, you don't realize, hey, John Steinbeck is narrating this book. But once you realize that, I have no problem with it. And some of the characters in the Hamilton family don't really tie in, but they're so well written that I cared about every single one of them. And the Trask family, who relive the Cain and Abel story, with two groups of brothers that you feel for every single one of them. I mean, you feel for each of them, and you have I would say three of the greatest characters you've ever written in literature. Samuel Hamilton, Lee, and Kathy. Kathy, I consider one of the greatest villains ever written in literature. This book is just phenomenal. It made me feel things at the end. I was thinking about my own family when I read this book. This is one of those books that I think I can live, I can study, and I can enjoy all at once. And that is why East of Eden, not only did it bring me into a whole new level of what a book's writing can be, it brought me my new favorite author, and this is a book I will absolutely study. I will absolutely reread. And one of the few books that I would recommend to pretty much everyone. This is not one of those books like Stoner or Gone with the Wind, some people might not like it, it has some problems with it that might turn people off. No. This book, phenomenal. I would recommend it to everyone. So it makes my number 2. Now, if you think that wow, Matthew talked so much about this book, what could be number 1? Well, my number 1 is everything I've talked about East of Eden and more. This book, I can confidently say, is probably, I don't want to put it on my paper. It's my favorite novel, because all of these books could replace it are in some ways my favorites in any day. But this book unquestionably has the greatest character work that I have ever read in any book. It's and remember what I said about Count of Monte Cristo got me in reading? The Count of Monte Cristo and this book, which is my number 1, are the 2 biggest Reddit darlings that almost everyone who reads loves. And I'm talking about Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry. I consider this to be the greatest Western ever written. And I can say with pretty much confidently that this book has the greatest characters, the greatest character work that I've ever read in any book, and that I will likely ever read in my entire life. The way Larry McMurtry writes these characters is just off the charts amazing. It basically details the life, or like the journey, of Gus McCrae and Woodrow Call as they go through a cattle journey. They run a cattle run from southern Texas by the Mexico border up to Montana. And I can say that as someone who's read Don Quixote this year, that this is the greatest character duo I have ever read, and I probably will ever read. I don't mean to sound hyperbolic, but like their relationship is incredible. There are like 50 characters in this book. I cared about every single one. This book brought out so many emotions in me. Like, I cried, I cheered, I literally had to jump up and down and like do some jumping jacks to release all the energy that this book came out of me. That sorry if I'm being long-winded, but this book is just, there's every character you can find something to relate to. You can find one character that's like you in this book, I guarantee you. The journey that these characters go through is beautiful. There's a ton of action. There's some romance. There's some tragedy. There's beautiful nature descriptions. There's characters that die that you will feel like they were like the death that their death in this book was like the death of a family member, if only for a moment. And the journey that they go on as they all grow as characters, as they end their story as characters, it's incredible. It's so authentic, so dramatic. And by the end, you feel like this journey, it transformed me because I felt so much for these characters. These characters changed so much that it's almost like I see myself change in them. And it's just incredible. The miniseries is phenomenal, and to prove how great this book is, even though my father hasn't read the book, the miniseries is like 6 hours, and he was so into it. He saw that whole thing in one sitting, and this book is great. I've read 2 of the sequels. It's part of a tetralogy. The sequels aren't as good. They're still really great, really readable, but this book is the best. Probably one of the greatest books I've ever read, one of the greatest American novels, and my #1 book of the year. It's incredible. So, of all the books on this list, the reason it's #1 is that if you only read one book from this list, read this one. It doesn't disappoint. So, that was a lot of talking. So, either way, I hope that this video was enjoyable. It turned you on to some great new books, and that your reading year was as good as mine. And if it wasn't, try out a couple of these books that I've talked about, because they don't disappoint. They're great. And these are books that I will reread, I will cherish for years to come. They're all, even though like they're from 15 to 1, like they all hold a special place in my heart. So hopefully this video was informative about, sorry, like just thinking about these books all makes me emotional. That your year of reading was as good as mine, and if you have some great recommendations, feel free to drop your favorites of the year in the comments below. And don't hesitate to put just general favorites in the list. So like, I'd love to hear your thoughts, love to hear what you think about these books. and love to hear how your year in 2025 was, just in general and when it comes to your reading. So happy holidays, Merry Christmas, and a Happy New Year. Hope this video finds you well, and happy reading. Goodbye.